But very often, again, we can't make strong assumptions about what is going into our, we don't have a lot of knowledge about what's going on in our corpus, and we want some help. We want some help navigating particularly very large corpuses, right? And before we start in these unsupervised approaches, we should think what we're asking an algorithm to do, right? We're in some sense asking it to do our work for us. Right? If you've ever done a cluster analysis or a factor analysis on a data set like the document term matrix that we created earlier today, you'll know that you always pick up a pattern, right? These pattern identification approaches are meant to pick up patterns, right? And so there's a real temptation to say, well, there's algorithms that are really good at this. But having spent 10 or more years working in this field, I can tell you that I've never discovered an algorithm that's as good at classifying text as a human. And why? That's because when you think about the, again, natural language usage, the ways that words can take on different meanings in different contexts, different people, when they're written by different people at different stages in time, there are going to be tools that help us kind of work through that. But at root, there's no replacement for human classification. And that's really, I think, not welcome news to a lot of people coming to this field who think, I've got a huge corpus, I want to analyze it, and I'm here to learn how to avoid reading a lot, right? Again, David Blay, the pioneer of topic modeling, and his colleague David Mimno, like to describe topic modeling as tools for reading. Right? They are not ways of measuring meaning in text in and of themselves. They need to be validated. They need to be interpreted very carefully. So just before we get into that, I just want to set in context what we're doing. We're asking a computer to make sense of ones and zeros, right? Computer doesn't have the kind of fine-grained intuition about how many of the examples I gave earlier about these kind of vagaries of natural language usage might change the meaning of a text. Instead, the bet is, again, at scale. If we have large amounts of data, we can start learning to detect patterns. Then we're going to do OK. That's the bet. OK, so what is topic modeling? Topic modeling is a kind of family of approaches that you can think of in a very primitive way as a kind of cluster analysis on words. And indeed, many of the early variants of topic modeling were essentially just that, either a cluster analysis or a kind of latent class analysis, some pattern identification approach applied to our document term matrix, or some other matrix representation of a corpus. Somewhere in the 1990s, the latent Dirichlet allocation, or LDA method, became popular. And this is a model that is going to essentially, in an iterative process, using Bayesian techniques, take a corpus, read in a corpus, or more specifically, our document term matrix. And from that, it's going to read in documents, look for patterns of co-occurrence in words, and then make guesses about a set of themes that are pre-specified by the researcher. So we might say we have 20 topics in our corpus, and given that input and a set of documents, the classifier will pass through each document. At first, it's going to randomly assign each document a probability of belonging to one of the, say, 20 topics that we've assigned it to, completely randomly. Actually, it's a Dirichlet process for those of you who are math geeks, but it's more or less a random process or similar to it. And then what we're going to do is each time we pass through, we're going to use something like naive Bayes classifier to improve our classification of the probability that each document belongs to one of these hypothetical 20 topics that we think might exist in our document. And then at the end of the day, we're going to get out an output from this analysis that says something like, a given document has a probability of belonging to topic number 1 that is 0.98 or something like that. That's one of the outputs. The other outputs we'll get is something like a list of words that most commonly appear for each topic. So that was all a pretty abstract discussion. Let's try and make it a little more concrete from a nice paper by David Blay that's less of a technical introduction to topic modeling and more of a lay audience introduction. In this paper in the Journal of Machine Learning in 1998, I think it was, you'll see an application of latent Dirichlet allocation to abstracts in the journal Science over 100 years. And the idea was that could an algorithm be trained to classify the discipline of the author or the content of the article more specifically, given enough training data, given enough input, right? And so we have a huge corpus of abstracts from the journal Science. And here's an example of one of them. Actually, I think this is the full text of the article. And what we're seeing is an article about Cold Spring Harbor. Very appropriately, this might be the Cold Spring Harbor of computational social science if we're being a little reaching. But let's say, so Cold Spring Harbor, for those of you who don't know, is kind of an institute like this to bring together people around cancer research. So in this article, across disciplines, in this article you'll see there's a lot of different words about genetics and biology and also computational stuff. And so what you're seeing if you're zooming in on your screen here is this is a visual depiction of how the topic model is working. So different words have different colors in our document here, which are assigned, which are affiliated here with different topics. So for example, here we're making a very silly assumption, which is that there's only 4 topics in the whole corpus. And we haven't labeled them, right? The topic model doesn't actually label the topics for you. That's the job of the researcher, and that's part of the validation step that's vital. But here, if we look at these terms, here we've got gene, DNA, genetic, life, evolve, organism, brain, neuron, nerve. You know, we could maybe say, okay, well, this one's really about neurology, this one's about biology, and this one's about genetics, and this one's about computers, right? And you'll see that each of these words has a given probability of being associated with the topic, and each document has a probability of being associated with each topic. And so what you're seeing here is just a visual representation of how different words are being associated with different topics. Now the question is very often asked, okay, so how is this different than a cluster analysis? In a typical kind of hard cluster analysis, right, we're making the assumption that each document can belong to one and only one cluster, or in our case, maybe we'd call that a topic or a theme in a text. Here, latent Dirichlet allocation and many extensions thereof are assuming it's a mixture model. So words can belong to multiple topics, documents can belong to multiple topics. And that means that we have a more probabilistic approach of classification and allow for the effect. We relax that assumption that I was mentioning earlier that each word has one and only one meaning, and instead we make an assumption about a bag of words. We're saying we're taking a document, we're jumbling all the words together, throwing them in a bag, and looking at patterns of co-occurrence in those words within documents, and using that to improve our ability to make predictions about the probability that a latent theme or topic exists in one document versus another. But in principle, every single document is going to have some probability of being affiliated with every single theme. And so very often the researcher will have to make some kind of arbitrary decision about what that cutoff point is that the probability really means that the topic exists in the model. Okay, so again, we've assumed here that we know the number of topics that is in the corpus. And when you think about it, this is kind of a catch-22, right? We want to use these unsupervised approaches precisely because we don't know enough about the topics. We can't read them all, right? At the same time, one of the required inputs of the model is the number of topics we expect to find. You know, so if I tell you, you know, how many topics do we expect to find in our Trump tweets corpus? I don't know. I have no idea, right? Is it 10? Is it 20? Is it 200? What is a topic, right? Those are all questions that need to be answered early and often, right? Because we will find, if we run an LDA analysis in our corpus, we will find 2 topics, 20 topics, 200 topics, right? And so part of our job when we do topic modeling is to learn how to validate and make assumptions. And typically, in the best practice in the field has become, and this is again why the analogy, a tool for reading, has become important, is that what we're really doing is detecting some patterns, then validating them using our own human knowledge, and then optimizing the classification, making better assumptions about the number of topics, and then rerunning the topic model again and again and again. There are going to be ways, as we'll see, to use some sort of goodness of fit measures to try to help us do that. But knowing personally the authors of these goodness of fit measures, I can tell you that they would tell you that you shouldn't just naively use these. These are at the end, nowhere near as good as human intelligence. Yep? Okay, so we're going to run our first topic model here using a very clean data set. We'll work through a messier data set in a second, and I'll explain why we're jumping around a little bit here. We're beginning with a very simple kind of topic modeling. This is just vanilla LDA. Now there's many variants of topic modeling. I tend to encourage people to use the structural topic modeling package for most topic modeling if you're working in R. We're doing an example with an earlier package called topic models. I tend to encourage people to use the structural topic modeling package because not only because it has this feature that we'll talk about in just a second, which is the ability to use metadata to improve topic classification, but also just simply because it's much easier to use. All those steps of prepping text that we did earlier in sequential form can be done in one line of code in structural topic modeling, for example. And so let's work through an example just so you have it in your toolkit, but we're going to go a little bit quick so that we can get to structural topic modeling, which I think, again, will be more useful to most people. So we're loading the topic models package. We're loading a data set in there called Associated Press. This is a very common corpus of news articles produced by the American Associated Press organization, and the very popular data set in the natural language processing community. Earlier, I told you that it's really easy to teach you with a clean example. If you browse this data, you'll see it's very clean. We have no character encoding issues. We don't have any strange patterns in the text. It's very well curated. So this is, in a sense, we've skipped the hard part. And here's how we might run a topic model. So we take our corpus, or our data here. We're applying a function called LDA, just for latent Dirichlet allocation. And here's the very important parameter K. That's the number of topics that we expect to find in this corpus. I'm making the completely arbitrary and probably ridiculous assumption that there are 10 topics in this very large corpus of news articles. There might be 700. I have no idea, right? But just for the purposes of illustration, we're going to say there's 10. And importantly, I've set a seed here. This is for the purposes of replication. So because LDA will begin with a random assignment of probabilities of documents belonging to topics, if we want to reproduce that, we need to set the random number or the seed that's going to use to make that randomization. Structural topic modeling, a nice feature is it uses something called spherical initialization. And so that will relieve us of this obligation. But here, just for reproducibility's sake, we want to set the seed. And you can set other control parameters in the LDA. For example, so this is an iterative approach, right? Each time we pass through the entire corpus with our naive Bayes classifier, we're going to make predictions. And at a certain point, those predictions are going to change less and less. And then we're going to consider that the model has converged. But we can specify different numbers of iterations that we want to wait until the model converges. And so, by default, I think it's something like 35 or something like that. But you could specify more or less. There's no real good reason why it's 35 that I know of. But there you have it. OK. So now that we've run our first topic model, this, depending on your machine, it might take a few minutes or 10 minutes or 20 minutes to run if you had an older machine. You would, by the way, if you have a large corpus, a very large corpus, topic modeling can take a very long time to run. One limitation of topic modeling is because it's an iterative approach, where each time we pass through and classify, make better and better guesses about which document belongs to which topic, it depends on the previous iteration, right? We have to compare the current iteration to the previous iteration. And so the code can't easily be parallelized or run on multiple CPUs, which speeds up most coding immeasurably, right? Or not immeasurably, but a lot. And so very often we take a long time, we wait a long time for topic models to run. One possible solution to this issue is to run a cloud server version of RStudio or whatever you use, Jupyter Notebooks if you're in Python or something like that. There's a link in the tutorial from yesterday has a link about running RStudio in the Amazon EC2 environment. And there, you wouldn't want to just throw a big computer at it because it's really it's not necessarily a memory or CPU issue, but you could open many, many instances of RStudio and run many, many models at the same time. That's one way to potentially speed up your process. And why might you care about time? Well, remember, if we're in the world where we are saying that there are, just a few, we don't know what the number of topics are, we're likely going to have to do a number of initial runs in order to figure out what the best, which range of topics is closest to where we want to be. Yeah, Carson.
Hey, can you elaborate a little bit on the trade-off between like time you need for fitting the model and vocabulary size?
Sure.
My experience is usually a lot of words occur so rarely that you would cut them off.
Sure. Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah. So Karsten here at Duke has mentioned that it's commonplace to remove both very common words and very uncommon words from the corpus before running a topic model. The idea being that those words are going to have very little influence on the overall classification, right? A word that appears everywhere, like earlier we were talking about America in a corpus of tweets by American politicians, right? Unlikely to mean much because everybody's going to say America, probably, maybe not. Or a really, really strange word that never appears, right? It's hard for the algorithm to learn about that because it's like, oh, well, that only occurred in these 3 documents, and so what is it? Where does it belong? I can't make a good guess about where it belongs, right? And that takes, that as Carson is suggesting, it takes longer for models to converge when there's these both very popular words, which are hard to figure out where they belong because they appear so often, and very rare words because they appear so infrequently. Yeah, and by default, again, I'm trying to get us to the structural topic modeling because it's going to do that by default, which is a nice feature, although we can shut that off if we want. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so we've run our topic model. We created an object called AP topic model. We want to plot the betas. These are the probability assignments of words to topics. We're going to use ggplot and dplyr to both produce a list of top terms by topic and then here to plot it. Yeah? Okay, so here we have the results of our first topic model. We have 10 topics. And earlier I mentioned that that was a totally arbitrary assumption, right? But let's take a look at some of them. This first one here says the top words are million, percent, billion, market, year, stock, prices, company. Okay, that sounds like economics or stocks or something. The second one says Soviet states, United, West, East, President, German, Union, Germany. Maybe Soviet sphere of influence in Western Germany, but maybe Soviet Union, maybe Germany, I don't know. United Iraq military air, that sounds pretty good. Kuwait, American, maybe that's the first Gulf War. But then if we come down to like topic 7, people knew, don't think, school just going years time. What is that? That is a bad topic. That is why this issue of naively assigning topics is a problem, right? We chose 10 kind of naively just so that we could neatly visualize this. Probably a better thing, I don't know, might have started out at 200 or something like that, right? But there we can have the opposite problem, right? That when we have too many topics, we can essentially be, predicting one document because we're just saying there's, a lot of a lot of different ways to categorize the documents, right? We're going to look at some tools in just a second that help us make this choice in a less arbitrary way. But this illustration is just to show you that, garbage in, garbage out, right? If we didn't make a good guess, we're going to get a nonsensical result. Some of them are not bad, right, given that we made this silly choice. But that's probably because the words United, Iraq, and military came up. And United was probably, by the way, United States parsed accidentally because of this earlier issue that Natalie brought up about, like compound nouns or noun phrases being severed by the tokenization of words at the word level. Yeah, tokenization of text at the word level. Yeah. Any other questions so far? Yeah, Martin.
Yeah, I was just curious if you could speak a little bit more about, best practices of interpreting these topics.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, there's just so many ways of going about doing this, and I'm wondering what you would consider convincing or less convincing.
Absolutely. If I may, I'm going to kind of wait to answer the question until we get into structural topic modeling, because there's going to be 3 or 4 functions that are really useful for precisely that process. But the short answer is, validate, read, in an iterative process. Visualization can also be extremely useful in looking at the topic. Something like the LDA viz package, is a neat kind of interactive JavaScript representation of a topic model where one can plot the distribution of topics in, say, principal component space to look at patterns of similarities in the assignment of words to topics, and then mouse over certain topics, which are here represented as nodes, in order to reveal the most common words associated with it and things like that. So that's a nice type of resource. There's others that work specifically with the structural topic model that we will soon look at as well. But that kind of back and forth, the ability to see the forest for the trees, as we like to say, is a really useful tool. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Hi, I have a question to what you just mentioned earlier. Is there a way and approach to detect compound phrases?
Yes.
Because it might be necessary, especially when you work with foreign language texts,
yes,
which you have no idea about.
Yes. So there's a few different options. The one that we've in my lab group have become most enamored of is called UDPipe. It's a relatively newer R package. There's also one called Phrase Machine, which was written by Hannah Wallach, who's one of David Minmo's students, or no, David Blaze's students. I think I'm getting messed up here. But she's very active in writing the code for the topic modeling world. We've also used that. It's a bit more complicated to use, has typically some Java issues, unless you install a Python backend for the parser called Spacey. Maybe in the Slack, Frito could share some information about that. But essentially, these are R packages. When applied to a text that will produce, instead of words, they will extract noun phrases or noun compounds from the text, which you could then pass into your topic model or to your document term matrix.
Just a follow-up question, but ideologically, do you think we should always try to look for compound phrases, when we do this?
It's a good question. We'll look at, when we get into, so I don't know of a comparison, maybe someone else does, in the world of topic modeling. When we get to text networks, one of the functions will allow you to tokenize by either all parts of speech, really. So one could do that comparison. There is a paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences by Alice Rule and Jean-Philippe Conté and Peter Bierman that suggests that noun phrases are indeed the most informative if we're out to identify the topical focus of a corpus. But it's hardly the authoritative statement on the issue. I think most people simply ignore noun phrases.
Argument. It feels like that sometimes phrases may contain more than 2 words, yes?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So it might be 3.
So the phrase machine package, for example, has a parameter called n-gram length, which would allow you to vary the length of the sequence of words that would be picked up by the noun, by the phrase.
But then there may be order, yes, because in some languages the phrase can be like
Right,
have
so
like
all
different
of,
order.
all of these are language specific. So they depend upon a tool called a part-of-speech tagger, which have to be trained in different languages. The UD pipe library that I mentioned earlier works with various languages, and I don't know, Frito, do you happen to know whether Russian is one of them? We don't know, but at least it's in a few other major languages. So this is something people think about and care about, but it's again, like so many other fields, dominated by the English-speaking world, and there is good work being done, but it's not yet widely available, except in the UD pipe package that I know. I believe the Stanford parser, which is one of the more popular tools in natural language processing, works with a number of different languages as well. I know it works with a number of different languages, but I'm just not sure whether it would do part-of-speech tagging in Russian. We'd have to look it up. Yeah. Any other questions? Or it does. UD pipe has Russian. Okay, good. All right. Sorry, I can't quite. The people on the live stream can't quite hear you.
Not with the language you know, but the largest problem is the language which you actually don't know. Like
Sure.
when I was doing Arabic, for example, so
Yeah.
that's where you start worrying like, what you are doing.
Yeah, I think doing topic modeling in another language, actually we have an expert on that here who's going to give a topic, maybe give a flash talk next week about that. Those of you on the live stream, we can maybe Slack you the paper, but uses Google Translate to look at some of those issues of translation. And so we should probably move on because it's a bit of a narrow topic, but we should connect on Slack about that, yeah. And those of you who are, maybe on Slack, people could also share language-specific tools other than UD pipe, okay? Any questions from the live stream? Well, as long as we're taking questions, no? Oh, yeah, okay. So we should keep moving. We have an exercise in here in case you want to practice. Remember, though, that really there's a real danger of reading tea leaves, right? Meaning, this practice of you drink a cup of tea and then you look at how the tea leaves are arranged at the bottom, and then you extract some meaning of that probably random assortment of tea leaves at the bottom of the cup, right? This is a ritual practice. That's kind of what we're doing when we do topic modeling very often, right? I think I see a face, or I think I see a smiley face, right? That's basically what we're doing. This is an analogy that was drawn by a data scientist who was at Facebook some years ago named Jonathan Chang, which I think is very nice. Okay, so that's kind of regular LDA. We're now going to move into structural topic modeling. This is the visualization that shows the architecture of the STM package written by Brandon Stewart, who spoke at the Institute last year, gave a great lecture on the STM package and some new extensions thereof around causal inference and text analysis that you can watch on the archive from last year. So it's our website, but 2017 at the end of the URL instead of 2018. Basically, it's a package that does everything from reading in text, pre-processing it, running an arguably better kind of topic model, then tools to evaluate it, and this gets the earlier question about validation, to help label and understand which type of thematic themes or words or groups of words are driving things, and then to visualize. Often to visualize the prevalence of topics according to metadata like time or author, but also interactive visualizations that, again, let us move back and forth and see to what extent metadata are driving classification, or just more broadly to help us validate the topic model. Okay. We're going to work with the same example that Brandon uses in his vignette. It's co-authored with Molly Roberts and Dustin Tingley. This I hosted on a Google Drive for y'all. We're going to create a data frame called polyblogs. This is the messy example that I mentioned earlier. So this is from, I think, 2008. It's a database of political blogs. It's about, I think, 3,000 of them from about, I think, 4 or 5 blogs. And if you browse the data a little bit, you'll see that there's a column that describes the text, so the text of the blog post. Then there's the day of 2008 in which it occurred, so you might see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then there's the name of the blog, and then there's a code that was manually assigned by a coder that says whether or not the blog was conservative or liberal. Okay, that's obviously somewhat of a crude classification, but we're gonna exploit that for illustrative purposes. Okay, so here we're creating an object called polyblogs. Next, we're going to load the STM package. We're going to use one of its core functions called text processor to read in the data, which is stored. The documents are in a variable called documents. And we also importantly need to distinguish or tell this function where the metadata live. These are the things like the day in which the post was produced, the blog on which it produced, and whether it was this liberal or conservative blog. Next, we're going to use a function called prep documents, which does most or all of the previous text preprocessing steps, like stemming, like removing white spaces, like removing numbers and punctuation. It's also going to remove, as we were discussing earlier, both very common words and both very rare words. One thing that's a little bit funky about the package is we have to specify these other objects that describe where the metadata are, where the documents themselves are, or that are the documents themselves, and then also a vocab, which is the list of words that ever appear in any text. And this is what the code actually looks like. We are running the STM function. We are specifying where the documents are that we want to run these on. We created this out object in a previous step. Here we're specifying where the vocabulary is, or the number, all the unique words. Here we're once again very naively assuming that there are 10 topics in this corpus. And here's a really important line. This is specifying how we want to use the metadata. So you can think of this almost like a regression model. So if you're familiar with a regression model in R, the thing on the left side is the outcome, and then this tilde means differentiates the dependent variable from the independent variables. And so here you can think of this as saying the prevalence of topics should be influenced by the rating, and that's the variable that describes whether the blog is liberal or conservative, and the day variable, and we've applied a smoother to that day variable. Here's some other parameters like the maximum number of iterations, this different type of initialization instead of random number generator, the spectral initialization, and then we've asked it not to spit out too much text in our console. And so when we run that, and that would take some time to run, at least a few minutes depending on your machine, we can then start to plot some of the output in ways that are similar to what we did in ggplot earlier. This plot is kind of nice. It's simply topic proportions on the x-axis here. And then we have the different topics. And this is the most prevalent topic. Again, one that doesn't make much sense, like one, think. But this second one sure does. Obama campaign will, yes we will, or yes we can, right? Will tax American, McCain, Palin, John. Again, we have a mix of some that seem quite meaningful and others that, that maybe do not. And a lot of these blog posts are about the presidential election and things like that. But this is a really neat way of looking at the prevalence of topics across the whole corpus, the prevalence of words within each topic. And so this is a useful validation tool. We clearly know after looking at this that 10 was a bad choice, right? That there's probably many more than 10 topics in this corpus. Next, in getting back to the interpretation thing, a question asked earlier about interpretation, this is a nice function that allows us to find passages of text that exemplify the topic that's been assigned to it. So again, we've got a kind of a weird, we've got a messy model here because we just naively assigned 10 topics, but if we were trying to validate what's going on with maybe some of these more problematic topics, we can ask here for 2 exemplary passages of topic number 3. and we would output, and it's in the markdown, it's not on these slides, you'd see some passages from the blog posts that are meant to exemplify that topic. And if you're seeing nonsense, again, it's garbage in, garbage out. It means you need to rethink your initial decision about the number of topics, or maybe something about the way you pre-process data that might be driving your results. Another extremely useful function from the STM package is a function called SearchKay. And here we can, again, specify a topic model. It looks very much similar to the STM package, except here, instead of specifying a single value of k, here we have specified two values, 10 and 30, but we could also write 10:30, and then this function would produce topic models for every value of k between 10 and 30. And usefully, it also outputs several goodness of fit measures, known as, or called semantic coherence, topic exclusivity, the log likelihood, and one other that's escaping me right now. And then you can plot those. And so depending on the metric, you're trying to either minimize or maximize the metric. And what's useful about this is you'll get a plot with these 4 different goodness of fit measures. And in most cases, or at least in my experience, they will produce different optimization points, but they might give you a range of values within which you might validate your topic model in a more qualitative, iterative manner. So for example, if all 4 of the goodness of fit measures suggest that the optimal value of k is probably between 20 and 25, you could then run those 5 models, go into them, use tools like the Find Thoughts tool or some of the other visualization tools I'll discuss in just a minute to try to further validate them. Yeah? Okay. Now, the other neat thing about this package is that we can plot the results according to their relationship with metadata. So we can say, for example, we can use this estimate effect function, and here what we're doing is we are going to essentially run a regression model that uses the metadata to predict the topic prevalence, and then we're going to do a bunch of plots with those. And so here's a plot that shows, we've plotted 3 topics here, topic 3, number 5, and topic 9. And here we have this liberal conservative scale that was created via this coder of these original blog posts. And we can look at which topics are more likely to appear on conservative blogs versus liberal blogs, for example, here. Yeah? We can do the same thing with time. So here we've regressed time on our topic prevalence, and we can look at whether a given topic, like which topic is this here, topic number 3, right, and its distribution over time in the blog posts. And here again, we might care about this for our analysis. There might be some interesting puzzle about why, rhetoric about war shifted or something like that we wanted to investigate in our analysis. Or we might be using this to further validate. If we have some knowledge about a topic that maybe only existed for 1 month, and we wanted to somehow know that, we might want to visualize it like this. While we're on the subject of time, though, this is a good example of the power of metadata to improve our topic classification. So let's think about the term war, for example. Or a theme about war. And let's think about looking at a corpus of documents for, say, the entire 20th century. And if we were looking at documents from 1930, 1955, 1970, 1985, right? The meaning of the term war would change a lot, right? Not only across the world wars, but then the Vietnam War, of course, but then say the war on drugs, right? Or the war on poverty. Right? And the way we use the term, if we're using regular LDA, we're assuming that all of those documents belong in the same soup, right? That we want to make sense of all of them. That the word war, as it was used in 1985, carries the same meaning, or it should have the same meaning when it co-occurs with other words as it did in 1920. If we're using metadata, then we're allowing year to influence the classification of documents, and we may be able to pull out separate topics around war, like the war on drugs versus the world wars, for example. So, you know, if it's the case that natural language use is always changing and that words are always changing according to contextual factors, then, you know, using time alone in a topic model could be very informative. And so I think that's, you know, when people ask, well, which metadata point should you use? I think time is a really good one. There's a danger, though, which is using too many points of metadata to predict topics. So here, for example, in our model, we've been using the liberal and conservative score to predict topic assignment, right? But what if there are cross-cutting topics, and that's something we care about theoretically, right? That which topics bridge conservative liberal blogs, right? Well, if we've maybe, you know, there's a few problems, right? If we've miscoded the political bias of the blog, that's one thing. But we're also really asking the topic model to think, you know, maybe find different topics in the conservative space and the liberal space. And so we've kind of forestalled the identification of potentially overlapping or bridging topics. And so, you know, at a certain point, you know, there's a temptation maybe to throw in the kitchen sink all the metadata you've got, but we need, you know, one needs to think carefully about which type of metadata is going to improve topic classification and which might distort it, which forms might distort it. Okay, so there's a number of additional visualization tools that are described in the STM documentation. One of them is called STM Browser. This is an interactive D3JS style tool for those of you who are familiar with that kind of interactive visualization. So this is a visualization where you can mouse over things and it will reveal data points such as the top terms associated with a topic at a given point in time. And also do check out the LDA viz package. That is a really neat way of visualizing the distribution of topics across terms in a multi-dimensional space. And there are helper functions that allow you to export topic models from both the LDA package and the STM package into the LDA viz package that might be worth checking out. Okay, so we're going over time, but we're going to be just fine as long as we take about a let's call it a 5-minute break, please. So we'll come back at 11:45 and we'll talk about text networks. Thanks.